Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I've always loved engines. The sound, the smell, the way a machine comes alive when you finally get it running right. It's like a heartbeat. You learn to listen to it, feel it. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, in my dusty garage off Route 12, that heartbeat was all I had. It was just another quiet evening, or so I thought. I was elbow deep in a busted pickup, grease coating my hands, an old rock station humming from the radio. The desert sunset was just starting to paint the sky when I felt something off. The wind died. The air, usually warm and dry, suddenly felt too still, too quiet. Even the cicadas stopped buzzing. Then came the sound, a low, deep rumble, like thunder, but longer, drawn out like the earth itself was groaning. I stepped out of the garage, wiping my hands on a rag, and looked up. The sky was cracking, not in a way you'd expect, like lightning. No, it was as if something enormous was peeling it apart, slowly. A jagged line tore through the clouds, and a light, brighter than the sun, bled through the rip. I stumbled back, eyes wide, unable to process what I was seeing. At first, I thought it had to be some sort of strange storm, or maybe a meteor. But when the light faded, they came through. Not ships, not like in the movies. These things were organic. Their surfaces pulsed and shimmered like muscle under skin. They floated silently, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, gliding through the tear like sharks through water. I ran back into the garage, slammed the door shut, and killed the lights. My breath came in sharp, shallow bursts as I peeked through the dirty window. The things hovered over the desert, casting long, writhing shadows. One passed directly over my shop, and for a moment everything inside flickered. Lights, radio, even the battery-powered clock on the wall. Then the screaming started. It wasn't close, not yet, but it carried on the wind, high-pitched, panicked, desperate. I locked every door, every window, grabbed the old crowbar I kept by the door. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew enough to stay low and stay quiet. Night fell, but it didn't get dark. Not really. The sky glowed a sickly green from those floating things. They lit the desert up like a stadium, sweeping their beams across the sand like searchlights. And then, around midnight, they descended. I didn't sleep. I don't think anyone did. Not out here. The lights from the skyships, or whatever they were, turned everything into an eerie daylight. The humming sound, low and steady, pressed against your skull like a weight, and then came the footsteps. Not the heavy boots of rescue teams, not the thud of military convoys. These footsteps were off, uneven, wet-sounding. I heard them squelching through the sand just beyond the garage walls, slow, deliberate. I stayed crouched behind my tool bench, crowbar tight in my hands, barely breathing. There was a noise, metal against metal. I recognized it immediately. The handle of my back door, being tested. I froze. Then I saw a shape at the window, tall, thin, wrong. Its head was stretched long, like someone had pulled a human skull like taffy. No eyes, at least none I could see. Its skin shimmered, almost translucent, like it didn't belong in this world. It pressed its face against the glass, not looking in, more like sniffing. I didn't move. I didn't blink. For a full minute it stayed like that, just listening. Then it turned and left, its body swaying like kelp underwater. After it was gone, I stayed put for hours. It felt like days. The hum outside pulsed every few minutes, like sonar. Once, my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I nearly threw it across the room. One bar of service, a text from my cousin in town. They're everywhere, don't go outside. That was it. No follow-up. Nothing else. I tried to reply, but the message didn't send. No signal. The last connection to the outside world gone in an instant. I crept to the front window and peered through the slats. The things were all over the place now. not just floating above but crawling across the land. Some walked upright like people, others skittered on too many legs. Some didn't touch the ground at all, just hovered a few inches above, twitching like broken puppets. They didn't talk, they didn't make any noise except for that wet, sloshing shuffle and the occasional burst of static that seemed to ripple through the air like feedback from an invisible speaker. And then I saw something that nearly made me scream. One of them had found old man Barlow. He lived half a mile down the road, ran a little roadside fruit stand, used to stop by the garage just to chat. He'd been trying to run. I could see him stumbling across the sand, flashlight swinging wildly, his dog barking and trying to follow. One of the floaters dropped down behind him. The light that burst out of it wasn't like a beam or a weapon. It was a pulse, like it tugged at him, ripped something out. He collapsed in an instant, stiff as a board. His dog yelped, turned and ran. The floater hovered over him, and then slowly, the body started to twitch. I watched in disbelief as his limbs bent at impossible angles, and his head lolled unnaturally to one side. Then he stood up. Only it wasn't Barlow anymore. He started walking, shambling, toward his own property, that same slow, broken movement as the others. I pulled back from the window, heart racing, my hands were shaking. They weren't just invading, they were taking us, turning us into things. I knew then I couldn't stay hidden forever. I had to get out, or die waiting. I spent the next few hours in silence, tucked behind the workbench, planning. Every sound outside made my skin crawl. There was no way I could fight those things. Not with a crowbar, not even if I had a whole arsenal. But maybe I could outthink them. My garage had something they didn't know about, a hidden crawl space beneath the floor. Back when I bought the place, I had dug it out to store spare parts and old tools I never used anymore, covered the entrance with a reinforced panel beneath a false bottom in the tire rack. It wasn't perfect, no water, no real ventilation, but it was hidden. I waited until the humming faded far enough into the distance that I couldn't feel it in my teeth anymore. Then I moved, slowly, carefully. Every step felt like thunder against the concrete. I peeled back the rug, lifted the false panel, and descended into the dark. The air was stale. My flashlight flickered as I sealed the panel above me. I settled into the corner, using an old blanket to cover myself. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have drifted off because I woke to a new sound. Footsteps, inside the garage. I held my breath, straining to listen. At first, it sounded like just one pair of feet, slow, deliberate, dragging slightly. Then a second set, heavier, uneven. The creatures were inside. Something metal clattered to the floor, and I flinched. One of them must have knocked over a wrench tray. Then came the sound of something sniffing, wet, raspy, close, right above me. I froze completely. The panel above me creaked. They were stepping on it. If they found the hatch, I was done. No chance of fighting back from down here. No room to run. I stared into the shadows, gripping my crowbar tight, heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. Minutes passed, hours maybe. Eventually, I heard them leave. No crash, no panic, just absence. The garage returned to silence, and I was left with the sound of my own breathing. When I finally worked up the nerve to lift the hatch and peek out, the place was trashed. Tools everywhere, cabinets torn open. My truck, the old red Chevy I'd been fixing up, had its hood ripped clean off. But they hadn't found the crawl space. Yet, I climbed out, keeping low. It was almost dawn. The light outside had changed, from sickly green to a softer bluish glow, almost like early morning frost. But it wasn't the sun. The sun never rose again the same way after they arrived. I spotted movement down the road, a figure limping toward the gas station near the crossroads. For a split second, I thought maybe it was someone who'd survived. I grabbed my binoculars from the wall, aimed them at the figure. It was Barlow again, still wearing the same clothes, still walking that broken, twitchy walk. But now, he wasn't alone. Two more of the turned were behind him, dragging themselves along like their strings were being pulled by something high above. They were spreading, multiplying. I needed to leave, that much was clear, but my truck was useless. I needed a vehicle, supplies, maybe even a weapon. There was only one place nearby that might still have what I needed. Old Fort Hanlin. It had been shut down years ago, just a husk in the desert now. But they'd left behind storage buildings, maybe even some gear. My buddy Rick had worked there before it closed. Told me stories of backup generators and old supply lockers. It was 20 miles out, too far to walk during the day. But maybe, just maybe, I could make it by nightfall if I kept to the canyons and stayed off the roads. That was the plan, at least until I opened the garage door and saw the footprints in the dirt. Not human, not mine, fresh, and heading toward the house. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, staring down at the prints in the sand. They weren't like normal tracks. Each one was deep, almost too deep for something that thin. The toes were long, pointed, and there were too many of them. They led from the garage to the back of my house, silent as a whisper, straight and deliberate. I kept low, circled around, crowbar in hand. The air was still thick with that faint humming, distant now, but still there, like background noise I couldn't switch off. The back door was cracked open just slightly. I knew I hadn't left it that way. I slipped inside. The kitchen was dark, except for the weird bluish glow filtering in from the windows. My boots barely made a sound on the tile. I moved slow, listening. No movement, no breathing, just the low creak of the old ceiling fan spinning lazily, even though I was sure I hadn't left it on. Then I heard it. A soft rasp, a shuffle, coming from down the hallway. I tightened my grip on the crowbar and edged forward, careful not to step on the creaky floorboard near the coat closet. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, the door to my bedroom hanging open at the end. That's where the noise was coming from. I leaned in, heart pounding, and then I saw it. It wasn't like the ones outside. This one was smaller, lanky. It crouched low in the corner of the room, its limbs twisted like wires bent the wrong way. Its head turned slowly toward me, and I saw its face, if you could call it that. Where eyes should have been were deep hollows, and from its skin, thin feelers twitched like antennae made of smoke. It didn't charge, it didn't shriek, it just looked at me, like it was waiting. I stepped back, slow and steady. My hand brushed against the doorframe and it creaked just enough. The creature twitched, then it unfolded. Its limbs snapped into place like broken bones resetting. In an instant, it was standing. No sound, no warning, just motion. I didn't think. I turned and ran. Down the hall, through the kitchen, out the back door. Behind me, the thing moved like lightning, skittering across the floor with that awful wet clicking. I barely made it to the garage before slamming the heavy metal door behind me and locking the deadbolt. Silence. Then a scraping. Soft at first, then harder, like fingernails on aluminum. I backed away slowly, breathing hard, eyes locked on the door. Then it stopped. The quiet pressed down on everything. I stayed there for what felt like hours, crowbar still in hand, every muscle in my body tight. But it didn't come through. Eventually, I dared a look out the side window. It was gone. No movement, no tracks, nothing. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the corner of the garage, staring at the walls, feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Why didn't it take me? It had the chance. It had me cornered. But it walked away. And somehow, that was worse. Morning came, but the sky stayed the same. Washed out blue, too bright, too empty. I hadn't seen the sun since the night it all began. Just that strange glow that never went away. It made everything feel like a dream that couldn't end. After the encounter with the thing in my house, I knew I couldn't stay any longer. The garage had been a shield, but not a safe one. I needed to move, now. I packed light, a backpack with some canned food, a couple of water bottles, a flashlight, a lighter, a screwdriver, and the crowbar. I also tucked away the old hand-crank radio I'd kept on my workbench for years. Never thought I'd need it. But now, I take any help I could get. The road to Fort Hanlin was nothing but cracked pavement and silence. I avoided open areas, sticking to dry creek beds, canyons where the skyships couldn't see me. Every time I heard that low hum ripple across the landscape, I hit the ground and held my breath. Halfway through the hike, I stopped beneath an old bridge and pulled out the radio. I hadn't used it in years, but the crank still worked. I turned it slowly, heart thudding, not expecting much. At first, just static, but then a voice, faint, warbled. "You're hearing this. Do not approach them. Repeat, do not approach them. They mimic, they learn." The signal cut to static, then came back, stronger this time. "We are sheltering in the Hanlin command depot. If you can hear this, you are not alone." I sat there in shock, hand frozen on the crank. Someone was alive, and they were at Fort Hanlin. It felt like hope for the first time in days. Real, solid hope. I stuffed the radio back into my pack and started moving again, faster now. The thought of other survivors lit a fire in me I didn't know I had left. But the closer I got to the base, the stranger things became. The skyships were still there, hovering like vultures, but now they were silent. No searchlights, no beams, just drifting, like they were waiting for something. I kept low and approached from the south side, where the hills offered some cover. I spotted the chain-link fence surrounding the base, partially torn down, twisted like something huge had passed through it. As I got closer, I noticed the ground was littered with scorch marks and deep, claw-like gouges in the dirt. The outer buildings were half collapsed, but the main depot, an old concrete bunker, was intact. I crept up to the heavy blast doors and raised my fist to knock, when I heard voices. Human ones. "He's out there." I saw him moving through the ravine. "Are you sure it's not one of them? He had gear, looked like a mechanic." I froze. They were talking about me. I called out softly, "Hello?" Silence. Then, the sound of locks being disengaged. The blast door cracked open just enough for a figure to peer through. A man, middle-aged, eyes sharp, rifle slung over his shoulder. "You bit?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, just tired and looking for someplace safe." He stared at me for a second, then opened the door wider. "Then come on in, but keep your eyes sharp. They're getting smarter." Inside the bunker, there were maybe 10 people, men, women, even a couple of kids, blankets laid out on concrete floors, battery-powered lights hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, safety. For now, I sank down against the wall and finally let myself breathe. But in the corner of the room, one of the women was fiddling with another radio. She glanced at me, pale and shaken. "They intercepted our signal," she whispered. I sat up. "What do you mean?" She turned the dial slightly, and a burst of static came through, followed by a voice. My voice! "We are sheltering in the Hanlin command depot. If you can hear this, you are not alone." My blood turned to ice. They weren't just mimicking our bodies. They were mimicking us. The room went silent. Everyone stared at the radio, listening to that replay of my own voice. It wasn't just a recording. It was perfect. Every hesitation, every breath, every bit of emotion. I could have sworn it was me speaking live. But I hadn't said those words. Not like that. Not into any signal. "They're copying us," someone muttered, "using our voices, trying to draw others in." The man with the rifle, Lucas, the one who let me in, snapped the radio off. "We shut it down, now. No more broadcasts. The woman who'd been tuning it, Nora, looked pale. Then how do we find others? How do we know who's still? We don't, Lucas said. It's not worth the risk. Nobody argued. They didn't have to. The rules had changed. The invasion wasn't just about brute force anymore. It was about confusion, disguise. They were studying us, learning how we operated, how we communicated, and they were better at it than we'd ever imagined. I spent the next few hours in a daze, helping however I could, patching broken vents, checking over the fuel line on a backup generator, replacing dead batteries in old flashlights. Keeping busy kept the fear away, at least for a while. But something kept gnawing at me. Why hadn't they just wiped us out? Why mimic us? Why study us? Why play this slow game of confusion? Later that night, as we all huddled in the dark, I got my answer. It came in the form of a child. Or rather, something that looked like a child. It was standing at the entrance of the bunker, just beyond the sealed blast doors. We'd all been on edge since the signal incident, and someone had set up a motion sensor out front. The alarm triggered at 2:47 a.m. We checked the cameras. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, dirty face, torn shirt, no shoes. He stood there, not moving, staring straight into the lens. He looked scared, confused, alone. Some of the group argued to let him in. It's just a kid, they said. Lucas wasn't so sure. Where did he come from? He asked. No one survives out there alone. They argued back and forth for 10 minutes. Then the boy moved. Not much, just a shift of the shoulders, a tilt of the head, and suddenly it wasn't a boy anymore. Its skin shimmered, shifted, like a film was peeling off its face. The eyes changed first, too black, too wide, too hollow. Then the body followed, limbs elongating, chest stretching upward like a balloon being filled. It grew 2 feet taller in seconds. Hair receded, skin thinned. By the end of it, we were no longer looking at a child. We were looking at a version of Barlow, the same dead stare, the same broken stance, but twisted, mutated, like it hadn't quite remembered how bones should fit. The mimic stood there, unmoving. Lucas shut the monitor off. No one opens that door, he said flatly. The creature never tried to get in. It just stood there for hours, waiting. Eventually, it walked away. The next day, we found fresh footprints circling the perimeter. 5 sets, all identical, all bare. That night, we doubled the watch. By the end of the week, we weren't sure who we could trust. One of the survivors, a quiet guy named Mason, started acting strange. Forgot names, stared too long, didn't sleep. When we questioned him, he said things like, "I'm learning," and "I remember now." We had no choice. Lucas locked him in one of the storage rooms. We never saw him eat or drink. But sometimes, late at night, we'd hear him whispering. Not words, voices, hours. Eventually, we stopped hearing anything from inside that room. We didn't open it. Not after what we saw with the kid. It's been 3 weeks since I first saw the ships. We're still at Hanlin. Supplies are low. Morale is lower. We've picked up scattered radio signals, but we don't answer anymore. Because now we know, the enemy doesn't just invade your world. They study it. They wear it. They become it. And they're getting better. Every day, they remember more. Faces, names, voices. Soon, they won't just be mimicking what we do. They'll be better at being human than we are. So if you hear a familiar voice out there in the static, if someone calls your name in the dark, if someone knocks on your door and says they know you, don't answer, because it might be me, and I might not be me anymore. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.